And it's nice to meet you. My name is Maja Staczkowska, and I'm the acting director of the Polish Cultural Institute here in New York. And I'm extremely thrilled to see you today on this meeting that was co-organized between the Institute, your school, and Alicja Winnicki, who helped us along the way. And I'll be just brief. So I would like to welcome Jack Fairweather, the author of the book about Pilecki, the volunteer. I know you know the story a little bit already, so I will not take up the time. I just want to say that this event is part of the Polish Heritage Days, and the patron of these days in May this year is Pilecki. So welcome everybody, and it's nice to meet you.
Hi. Thanks, Maya, and hi, everyone.
Hello, they are muted because they are in the classrooms full of a lot of students, Jack.
Yeah, amazing, Alicia. Thank you so much for arranging and for having me. And yeah, hi, kids. Happy Tuesday morning. Hope you had a good Memorial Day weekend. Well, I'm very excited to be here and to tell you a bit more about this amazing chap, Witold Pilecki, whom it sounds like some of you have got to know his story, and I would love to help build on your knowledge of this great war hero and of World War II, and yeah, and help us all reflect on his heroics and why his story matters today. So I have a short presentation to give you, which will hopefully help you understand a bit more about Pilecki and also about my journey as to how I discovered this guy and and what inspired me to spend 5 years researching his life and following in his footsteps and writing a book about Pilecki, which hopefully some of you will have read and or maybe will be inspired to or at least dig more into Pilecki's story as a result of today. And I think then there'll be some time for some questions. I got a bunch of them through and they looked great. I think some will be answered in the presentation, but I'll hear for all questions, both about Pilecki, about World War II, about history, about writing, about how you become an author, anything you want. So I am going to try and share my screen so I can show you this presentation. Let's hopefully this works. Just to ask the host if you would be able to either make me the host or give me host sharing permissions.
One moment, I'm gonna try to, I am the host right now, but I don't know how to transfer power. Stop the, no, pin, stop line, rename. One moment.
I think if you click on that share screen tab, then there's a little pull down menu that allows you to change host or share host. Okay, great. One second. All right, almost there. All right, cool. So here is the cover of my book, and I'd like you, everyone in your different classrooms, just to spend a moment with me imagining the scene. It's dawn on September the 19th, 1940. The Second World War has just begun, or a year or so into the war, and a Polish underground operative named Witold Pilecki sits in an apartment in the Żoliborz district of Warsaw. This is a wartime image of that apartment, and Pilecki's sitting on the third floor. And here we have an image of him in his plaid jacket, likely in that apartment, sitting next to a fellow underground officer. When this picture is taken, he was 38 years old. He was a reserve officer in the Polish cavalry. He'd been a gentleman farmer. He was a devout Catholic. He was a father of 2 kids who were a little bit younger than you. But here they are, in a few years before the start of World War II, dressed in fancy dress. This is Pilecki's wife, Maria, and here they are on their wedding day. This is one of my favorite pictures of Pilecki, because you can sort of see him bursting with pride in his military uniform. And before the war, Poland was one of the most pluralistic societies in Europe. So 1/10 of the population was Jewish. It was the largest Jewish community in Europe. And this is the scene on which the Germans arrived in 1939. And after a brief fight against the Polish army, including Pilecki and his men who were summoned to the front line, the Germans rolled into Warsaw. Poland surrendered, and here we see Hitler in Warsaw in October 1939 saluting German troops. Hitler at this stage hadn't formulated his plans to annihilate all of Europe's Jews. He was intent at that point in destroying Poland as a nation by eliminating its professional classes. And the whole country was subject to a brutal reign of terror, which is, I think, so hard for us to imagine today. Thousands of Poles, doctors, teachers, writers, lawyers, Jews and Catholics alike were rounded up off the streets, dragged away to be shot or interned. 50,000 Polish nationals were killed in the first 4 months of the occupation, which is just a staggering number when you think about it. The following year, in May 1940, the Germans built a new concentration camp to hold some of their prisoners. Its name was Auschwitz. Little was known about what was happening inside the camp, but Pilecki had learned from informants that there was going to be a roundup scheduled in the Żoliborz district where he was staying in that apartment, that all of those arrested would be sent to Auschwitz. So he decided that he was going to stay in that apartment and allow himself to get arrested, because the underground gave him a mission, an extraordinary mission, one of the bravest of World War II. It's completely mind-boggling, I think, for us today. His mission was to get arrested in order to infiltrate Auschwitz. When he was inside the camp, he was going to then form a resistance cell and start gathering evidence of Nazi crimes in order to send back to Warsaw and warn the world, in order to help attract attention to Poland. At this stage of the war, that first year of the war, Poland very much was sort of fighting alone its resistance. The British and French had declared war against Nazi Germany, but they were holding back, unsure of what to do. And the Polish underground needed help and wanted to tell the world about what the Nazis were up to. So let's go back to this apartment in September 1940 with Pilecki on that third floor. Imagine now with me the sound of trucks rolling up to the building, and then there's shouts and gunshots outside. The building caretaker comes up the steps, bangs on the door, and Pilecki's sister-in-law, whose apartment it is, answers, and the caretaker says, get out whilst you still can. The Germans are surrounding us. This is a chance for you to escape. What does Pilecki do? Well, of course, we know what his mission was. He sat in that apartment and then heard the sound of Germans bursting in and entering. He calmly put on his jacket as he heard them coming up the steps. And just then he noticed that in the room in which he was sitting, it was actually a bedroom with his nephew, little 3-year-old boy called Marek, was standing up in his crib, wide-eyed with terror because he could hear the shouts and the gunshots. And the boy's teddy bear had fallen on the floor. And Pilecki stooped down in that moment, just as the Germans burst into the apartment, and handed the teddy bear to the boy and whispered to the child, Marek, see you soon. And then against every instinct he must have had, Pilecki stepped into captivity. 3 days later, he arrived in Auschwitz. And I think some of you may know this image, or certainly the gate with those words in German, Arbeit macht frei, work sets you free, which for the Germans was a sort of devilish humor, because the only way to escape the camp was to be worked to death. And they would often point to the crematorium chimneys beside the entrance to say, the only way you're getting out of here is through the chimneys of the crematorium. And here we have Pilecki now as a prisoner. You can see in his striped gear, shaved, and with his number 4859. He was the 4,859th prisoner in Auschwitz. So over the next 2.5 years, Pilecki delivered on that remarkable mission. He forged an underground army in Auschwitz that sabotaged facilities, assassinated SS officers, and plotted an underground uprising. He arrived in Auschwitz at its beginning as a concentration camp for Polish nationals. I think this is a really important point to make, because I think when a lot of us hear the word Auschwitz, we think of it as this death factory for Europe's Jews, but that was what it became towards the end of the war. Pilecki was arriving at its beginning when it was a concentration camp. And I think this is why his story is so important, because through his experience in the camp, through the reports that he wrote, we get to see how the camp was turned from a holding facility for prisoners into a death factory for Europe's Jews. Pilecki was the very first to report to the world on the camp's horrors, which he smuggled out from the camp. He was also the first to try and stop them. 3 years before Allied commanders publicly acknowledged the camp's existence, Pilecki was urging the Allies to bomb the camp. And yet, for all of these incredible exploits, his story is almost unknown. I'll do a quick raise of hands. How many of you have heard of Oskar Schindler? Anyone? Anyone heard of it? We've got a couple of hands. There you go. How many have you heard of Witold Pilecki before the last couple of weeks? Right. Well, course, a big factor in why we know about Oskar Schindler is because of that amazing Steven Spielberg film that some of you may have watched. But it was very striking to me that Pilecki, this great hero, was not well known. I hadn't heard of him, and I write about and study war. And I think probably a lot of people you meet, if you tell them in the street, oh, I heard about this extraordinary guy, Witold Pilecki, they might say, Witold who? I only heard of his name by chance. In 2011, I met up with a reporter friend. I was a correspondent in Iraq and Afghanistan during the fighting in those two countries. And just to give you a sense of my journey to Pilecki, here we go. I had, survived a couple of suicide bombings and spent the best part of 10 years covering those wars. My friend Matt had been to Auschwitz and had learnt about a resistance cell in the camp, and I remember being very struck by that idea, like how was resistance possible in a place like Auschwitz? And it was a year or two later that Pilecki's report, his longest report written after he had escaped the camp, was published in English for the first time. And I read a review of that and remember thinking, wow, this is the guy who created a resistance cell in Auschwitz that seemed to really change my idea of what the camp was about, and gave me this question of just how was resistance possible in a place like Auschwitz. I think I also felt quite personally challenged by the story, because when I began my research, I was the same age as Pilecki had been at the start of World War II, and I also had a wife and 2 kids in the home. And it got me thinking, what would make Pilecki risk everything for such a mission? And what was it about the idea of him voluntarily going to Auschwitz that spoke so powerfully to me? So I knew I had to find out more. And that was when, Googling around, I discovered that he had a single Wikipedia paragraph to his name describing his mission, and really not much else, at least in English. And learned a bit that Pilecki gone on to fight against the communist takeover of Poland after World War II. And this was one of the reasons why so little was known about him, because he was captured by the communists and executed, and all trace of what he had done in Auschwitz was either destroyed or locked away in military archives. In fact, even mentioning his name in Poland after the war could lead to arrest. And it wasn't until 2012 that report I mentioned was translated into English. That report had been sitting in a small archive in London for decades without anyone paying much attention to it. And this is Pilecki's report that he wrote after his escape from the camp in 1945. And that gives you a real sense. I mean, as a historian, this is what you love to work with. And for some of those who are going to be becoming historians, I hope you sort of get a bit of a thrill of seeing this document, because not only is it original, but you can actually see that blue looping handwriting around the edge of the page. That's Pilecki's own handwritten notes. He had this typed up on a typewriter and then quickly made edits. This was in 1945, and he was about to start his new mission fighting against the communist takeover of his country. So he didn't have long to spend thinking about the past. But what Pilecki wrote in this report only deepened the mystery for me, because it was filled with gaps. Names were hidden by Pilecki to protect his colleagues. some events were obscured or omitted. And the report also left unanswered some of the crucial questions that Pilecki himself didn't have the answer to. And they were the ones that I really wanted to find out more about. What happened to all of these reports that Pilecki wrote in Auschwitz and smuggled out? Why were those reports ignored by the Allies when he was telling them about the horrors of the camp? Why was nothing done? And of course, that tragic question, what would have happened had the Allies taken action? And indeed, how many lives would have been saved had they done so? So in 2016, I set out to try and find the answers to those questions by heading to Warsaw. And so my job as a historian is to both gather documents like this that are written by the main character of my story, but it's also to gather oral testimony. And the very first person I wanted to meet was Pilecki's children. And oh, frozen screen. Am I frozen? No. That seemed to. Oh. Here we go. Here, and first person I wanted to see was Andre, and here he is with his sister. For 50 years, he had been told that his dad wasn't a hero who had volunteered for Auschwitz, but was an enemy of the state who had fought against the communists and therefore was a traitor, because Poland, as some of you may know, had a communist dictatorship imposed upon it after the Second World War that didn't fall until the end of communism across Europe. And I was a little bit worried about meeting Andre because I had no idea what his what he would think to me, a British guy showing up to come and tell his father's story. But I shouldn't have worried because he was the most loveliest chap. Here he is when I met him. And this is a very typical scene for my work. You'll see my notebook and recorder is out, and I'm just asking him questions and questions, every little detail he could give me, because as a historian and a biographer, I couldn't make up Pilecki's thoughts. I could only use details that people who had known him could attest to. And I think none was more important than speaking to Andre and trying to find out his father's thinking. What was amazing was how many people were still alive in Warsaw in 2016 who had known Pilecki, and many had never shared their experiences before with me. And I had the chance to interview maybe 20 members of the underground, some who had been in Auschwitz, others who had fought with Pilecki after he escaped from the camp. And I think it was one of the great privileges of my research was having that experience of meeting these brave men and women who had fought against Nazism. So I also wanted to go back as much as possible to the places that Pilecki had been, and none was more important to me than that apartment where Pilecki began his mission. And this is what it looked like when I went to visit. A lot of the city was destroyed in World War II, but incredibly, that one building was one that survived. And of course, I wanted to go inside to try and see that very room where he began his mission. So found a way to get inside, and I knew it was on the 3rd floor, so up I went. And it turned out that when we knocked on the door, no one was in. But of course, I wanted to get inside. My researcher had the suggestion that we try and recreate what it would sound like on the steps when the Gestapo came up, and she marched up, and then, thinking no one was inside, she then like banged on the door Gestapo style, and as it happened, that's what it took to wake up those inside. It was a student house, and everyone was still asleep at noon, and this young man, maybe a bit like some of you, had no idea who Witold Pilecki was, or that his bedroom was where the mission to Auschwitz had begun. This is what it looked like. And what I wanted to do was, as much as possible, not only visit the places Pilecki had been, but also meet some of the people who had witnessed Pilecki in action in those places. And that led me to meet the little boy who had been in that crib that you may recall I mentioned. Here is a picture of that little boy on Pilecki's knee, and here he is when I got to meet him a few months later in 2016, after my first trip. And I brought him back to that apartment, and it was the first time he had come back after the war, because the family had been kicked out by communists. And here he is, Marek, describing what the room was like. And here he is now describing that incredible moment when the Germans burst in.
One was in an army suit, German, and another civil.
Yes.
And they ask mother if there are any men. There's any men. In the same moment, uncle moved from this room. Ask what's going on? What's going on? And
he was ready to go. He had his jacket on, or
I think he was prepared, because he has time to
yes.
no.
Yeah. What did he say to you when he was leaving? Did he say anything? Do you remember? He
See you
hug
soon.
you? See you.
So you can see he's sort of tearing up towards the end, Marek, which always moves me when I see it, because by the end of that meeting in that apartment, he was in tears, thinking about Pilecki and his mother. And that was the moment when Pilecki began his mission. And I think I'd like to conclude this short presentation by dwelling for a moment on why I found that start of his mission so important. And I think it's because in that room, he, as a volunteer, he went by choice into grave danger. He chose to go to Auschwitz. He chose to create an underground cell. He chose to smuggle reports out of the camp. And why is that act of choosing so important? And I think for me, it's because he reminds us that empathizing with the suffering of those beyond our immediate family and friends is also a choice. As the fate of his reports show, it's not the instinctive response of people to come to the rescue of others, especially if they are facing danger or hardship themselves. But just because it's not our instinctive reaction, it doesn't mean that we are absolved from taking action. The Nazis were counting on the world turning away from their crimes. And Simon Wiesenthal, the post-war Nazi hunter, recounts his experience of being in a concentration camp when an SS guard said to him, "However this war may end for you, we have won the war against the Jews. None of you will be left to bear witness. But even if someone were to survive, the world would not believe him." I think Pilecki asks us, no matter how terrible the subject, no matter how difficult our own situation, that we never stop trying to understand the plight of others. And I think with that idea in mind, which for me really inspired me to follow in Pilecki's footsteps these past 7 or 8 years, I would like to end this presentation and answer some of your questions. Hopefully you've got a sense from this of a bit of why Pilecki matters to me, but also about what it's like to be a historian and a researcher, and how I went about engaging with my historical subject, and perhaps maybe some ideas for how you can connect with the history around you, because of course whilst Pilecki's story is extreme and incredible, we all surrounded by history all the time, and I hope you can see ways to connect with history around you. So back over to you, I think.
Good morning, Jack. Alicia Winnicki here. I know that the students are in the classroom right now. So to start you off, maybe I will read a couple of questions from the questions that they already forwarded to you.
Okay.
So one of the question was, how did researching about Pilecki and his situation affect you as a person?
Well, that's a great question. I think as a Brit, and I think maybe for Americans too, we are very distant from the experience of World War II, and it was really striking to me visiting Poland for the first time how everyone I met had family who were affected either by the Nazi German occupation or what followed the Soviet-imposed communist regime. There was a huge amount of suffering in people's memories that I think everyone I met had a story to tell, and that was very sort of powerful to me. I think as his biographer, you're always looking for ways to connect to the subject that you're writing to, and I think there was none sort of more touching for me than sitting down with the families of those who had known Pilecki and could share their memories with him. Maybe I'll see if I can show you one other little video, which is after Pilecki escaped the camp and had to shelter in a safe house in outside Krakow, and in order to recreate the experience of escaping from Auschwitz, to be able to write about it, I followed in his footsteps, leaving the camp at the same hour and the same time of year, and then tracing his footsteps across southern Poland to this safe house. And this was one of my favorite moments of the research. Let me see if I can just share this with you now. Or maybe not. Oh, that's the one. This is Pilecki after his escape. And this is the family he sheltered with. And just look at that little girl there. Bear her in mind, because this is the safe house where he stayed That little girl, this is her a few years back, sharing with me a cup of tea and some lovely sandwiches. And at that table where we were eating, that's where Pilecki wrote his first report about the camp as a free man. And I remember being, really moved and humbled by the experience of meeting that family and sharing their memories of Pilecki sitting at that very table that I was sitting at then. A good question, long answer.
Thank you for that.
There is one more, I think there are lots of them, but one more that I want to read is, did Pilecki's courage give you the courage to reveal his story?
I think that's a really good, that's such a good question. I think probably some of you have read a bit about the Holocaust, or maybe have watched Schindler's List, and it's a very, deeply disturbing period of human history that I think reveals the very worst of human nature. And there were times when I was doing my research, reading lots of reports and accounts by survivors, and would be very just moved and upset. And I think what really kept me going was the light that Pilecki shines on that dark experience, because while so many suffered and died in Auschwitz, Pilecki was, a very rare, remarkable example of someone who found the courage to reach out and help others in the camp, and to do so at great risk to himself. And I found his story became a way for me, whenever I was feeling a bit low or upset by the research, I would think about Pilecki and the example that he set, and he became, in a way, my guide through the camp. And I think that's the experience I wanted people to have when they read my book, is that this is a really dark time, and yet Pilecki is a story that helps us through the camp. And he inspired so many people to survive in Auschwitz, the members of his underground, and I think he can inspire you too to confront this really dark history.
Thank you for that. We have one more question. It's a loaded question.
Loaded.
Yeah. How did you handle the mental toll of uncovering the information required to write this book? And what was your main motivation to continue writing this book, despite all the hardships that you may have encountered?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think I was very affected by this thought, this double tragedy in Pilecki's story, that not only did he do this incredibly brave thing of going to Auschwitz to report on Nazi crimes, that all of that courage was not enough to move the Allies to take action against Auschwitz. So that is a tragedy of massive proportions, because had the Allies taken action, many lives would have been saved, I'm convinced. But then there is a second tragedy, that this courage, this bravery was then buried by the communist regime of Poland for decades. And I remember talking to Andrei and Zofia, his two children. They told me how they sat in a classroom like your classroom, about your age, and they heard over the school tannoy system, it was announced across the country, but especially in classrooms, that the traitor Witold Pilecki had been executed as an enemy of the Polish state. And the thought of that experience for the kids the thought of them, I mean, they knew their father was a great man, but they didn't know anything about his mission to Auschwitz. He hadn't told them or told his wife. That they would live all of their adult lives not knowing what a hero their dad was in detail. Yeah, it felt like a terrible injustice. And I think as a journalist, as a historian, righting wrongs and injustices, I mean, that's what motivates me and what I felt I would like to try and do somewhat with my book, is try and share his story and correct some of those wrongs, to show that Pilecki's reports, I mean, he managed to get his reports out of Auschwitz and get them to the Allies. You know, he succeeded in his mission. It was, in fact, the world that did not respond, that failed. And I think it's our duty today to now, you know, recognize that great courage of Pilecki and help correct that second tragedy, which was his story being forgotten, by sharing it as much as possible.
Thank you.
And I think there is one more very interesting question for me. I don't know if you can answer it, but let's see. Did he ever regret his decision about what he's done, Pilecki? Is there any information about it? Does he write anywhere in any letter, you know, that you've maybe have encountered? Or
that's a good question. I don't think he regretted his decision, because I think he felt it was his duty. It's what the underground asked of him, and he was an officer fighting for his country, and, you know, decided that he must do this mission to help Poland. It was the case, though, that after the war, he really struggled to connect with his family. And he was reunited with his wife and his 2 kids, but he'd had this terrible, extreme experience that made it very hard for him to talk about with anyone who had not also been in Auschwitz. And I think some of you probably have that experience if you've gone through a really difficult time. Other people don't necessarily get what you've been through, and that was Pilecki's experience. And he sort of lost himself in his next mission to fight against the communist regime without having the time to share himself with his family and children in a way that they wished. And one of the very last things he wrote just before he was captured by the communists was a little snippet that I found in the archives, in which he recounted discussions he had with prisoners in Auschwitz who were due to be executed the next day. So they knew that these were their last moments. And he said that every one of those prisoners had the same single regret, which was that they hadn't done more to connect with their loved ones during their lives. And I think that was a very powerful reflection for all of us, right? I mean, do we connect enough with the people we love and tell them that we love them? I know I could do better, and maybe we all could in different ways. And that was the last thing that Pilecki wrote. So it's not a regret about his mission, but maybe a regret that he couldn't reconnect with his family afterwards, and maybe a little sign of hope that he realized that and wanted to.
There is one more, thank you for that, Jack. There is one more question here. What inspired you to delve into the story of Witold Pilecki and write The Volunteer? Were there any particular challenges you faced while researching and documenting his remarkable journey? And how has your experience as a journalist influenced your approach to storytelling in The Volunteer and other works? Do you believe that blending historical facts with a narrative style helps to create a more engaging and impactful reading experience?
Oh, well, okay. Lots of questions. I think, of course, I faced a really big challenge, which is that I'm not Polish or Jewish, and I don't speak Polish. And, you know, here was a story about a great Polish war hero. And so I think the first thing I had to do was find a team of researchers who could help me, and without whom I could not have written this book or interviewed the family or so many survivors. So in fact, it became an advantage to me, because whilst I couldn't directly connect with those I was interviewing, my two researchers were able to share their cultural insights and really help me understand a lot of the particular nuance of what Poland was like in the 1930s and in the 1940s. And of course, it's great to have a team with which to work, of people who believe in what you're doing and you share energy. I think being a writer can be quite lonely, because it's just you in front of your computer writing away. So having some researchers to share the mission felt really good. I think in terms of, you know, writing style, then of course there's academic styles of writing, and probably some of you have read some World War II histories, and maybe some of them are more academic. They're of course really important, because academics are always pushing the boundaries of our knowledge. They're the ones who are in the archives, digging up new sources and helping us dig deeper into the history. But I think I felt my job was a bit different, which was to help connect more people to the story. Of course, I wanted to do all of that archival research and make new discoveries, but I also wanted to make a narrative that people would connect with, because this is one man and his very brave sacrifice. And I think understanding his decisions can help, you know, inform us today. Like, this isn't some dry, you know, exercise telling us about the past. This is, I hope, you know, a really touching, moving account of one man's story that can influence us today. So, yes.
Thank you, Jack, for that. Just so everyone, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Giovanni D'Amato. I'm the assistant principal here, and I wanted to just thank you, Jack, for giving us some time this morning. And you know, we started our study of Pilecki, I think 2 years ago, slowly, and we've slowly intertwined him into the curriculum. And so the goal now is to use this discussion today to springboard into the students reading your book, you know, the young adult version. And we're going to be piloting it in several classes. So some of the teachers here that are logged on will be developing some of the work that it's going to go into it. So all of your, you know, your presentation was very insightful and helpful to all of us. And really, this was a great opportunity for the students. So just so you know, at any given point during this presentation, we had about 200 students logged on. Each classroom has about, like, you know, 30, 34 students. And so we cycled in and out. And at that gap, it was when the periods were changing, but the presentation kept on going as the students shifted. So again, Jack, thank you for everything. Maya, thank you for making today possible, you know, working with it. And Alicia, thank you as always for helping and bringing these opportunities to our school. So thank you, guys. All right.
There's just one more thing I want to add. I would like to welcome Ivona Korga, the director of the Piłsudski Institute here in New York, in Greenpoint. So she has joined us as well. So we have Polish diaspora organizations as well here today.
Thank you so much, Jack. This high school, Williamsburg High School for Architecture and Design, is a very special place that I have to say, the first school in New York City that embraced the history of Pilecki and your book, and now they are part of the curriculum. So therefore, even more so meaningful this meeting today with you. And I want to thank Maya for making it possible for us.
Oh, well, Maya, Alicia, Ivona, thank you so much for, being such sort of shepherds of Polish culture in the US. And I think, Giovanni, it's like such a privilege to address all these engaged students, and I really think you're ahead of the curve, because I think Pilecki is is emerging as a great world figure from the war, and those the ways in which his story was hidden, have fallen away. There's going to be a film coming out about him in a couple of years based on the book. Hopefully will be out in 2026, and that will really give, I think, added prominence. So all of you students will be, you'll be knowing about this great hero long before many of your co-years in other schools. Thanks to Giovanni, your great work sharing history. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to everyone. And yeah, thanks everyone. Really nice to meet. And just let me know if I can help with any historical questions that you have as you delve deeper into Pilecki's story.
Thank you very much for everything and for meeting us.
Ciao for now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.